news tonight, Jordan, along the Arab and Muslim world, celebrates the new Hijra year with a major religious ceremony organized by the Ministry of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs. Israel begins setting up roadblocks in Palestinian neighborhoods in Arab East Jerusalem and deploying soldiers elsewhere amid escalating tensions across the occupied territories. The Syrian army is preparing an offensive against insurgents in northern Syria, aided by Iranian troops and Russian jets. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Jordan, along with the Arab and Muslim worlds, mark the Hijra New Year according to the lunar calendar. Representing His Majesty the King, His Royal Highness Prince Hashem bin al-Hussein led a major ceremony at the Royal Cultural Center held by Ministry of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs. In a sermon, Minister of Awqaf, Hayil Dawood, stressed the importance of the Hijra, the migration of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his followers from Mecca to Medina in the history of Islam. On the holy occasion, His Majesty the King received cables of good wishes from leaders of Arab and Muslim countries. The King and His Royal Highness Crown Prince Hussein also received congratulations from senior civic and military officials. France's Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius said it is vital the international community push the Palestinians and Israel to reach peace as the situation is getting out of control. The White House also said it has deep concerns about the violence and condemns the loss of any innocent lives, whether it be Israeli and Palestinian. The White House spokesman Josh Earnest said the United States is in regular contact with Israeli and Palestinian officials about the escalating violence. The calls comes amid rising tensions and violent clashes between Israeli occupation forces and Palestinian protesters. Here's the story.
A day of mourning in Bethlehem. This is the funeral of Mu'taz Zawahri, a Palestinian who was killed by Israeli troops during clashes a day earlier. Thousands of Palestinians marched through the narrow streets of Bethlehem carrying his body. The shooting death of Zawahri triggered fresh violent clashes in the city. Hundreds of Palestinians hurled stones at Israeli forces, who opened up with rubber bullets and tear gas to disperse the angry protesters. The clashes came as the Israeli military began setting up roadblocks in Palestinian neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, deploying soldiers on main roads to try to combat the worst spate of violence inside Israel and the occupied West Bank in years. The military measures are the most serious clampdown in the Jerusalem area since a Palestinian uprising a decade ago. Palestinians called it collective punishment. Sari Bashi is the Israel-Palestine country director at Human Rights Watch.
The recent wave of attacks against Israeli civilians would challenge any police force. But locking down Palestinian neighborhoods in East Jerusalem is the wrong response. The checkpoints will restrict the freedom of movement of all residents, not just suspected attackers. And given the history of abuse and neglect by Israeli authorities in East Jerusalem, it's only going to exacerbate tensions between residents and police. It's exactly what we don't need.
Despite the enforced measures, a Palestinian attempted to stab paramilitary police at an entrance to occupied Jerusalem's world-old city before he was shot dead. In what seems an attempt to deal with the latest serious challenge to his right-wing government, Israel's Prime Minister renewed calls for peace talks with the Palestinians, but without preconditions. He says, I am interested in the immediate resumption of peace talks with our Palestinian neighbors with no preconditions, and it will be a difficult negotiation. Palestinians have demanded Israel stop settlement building, free Palestinian prisoners, and set a timeline for resumption of peace negotiations. Since the start of the month, 30 Palestinians and 7 Israelis have been killed in stabbings, shootings, car rammings and military crackdowns that have stirred memories of past Palestinian uprisings. The causes of the turmoil are multiple. But Palestinians are angry about what they see as increased Jewish provocations against Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in Jerusalem's Old City. Rad Btush for the news at 10.
Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour said Jordanian-Israeli ties will be affected if provocations at Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque compound continue. He said the kingdom will keep all legal and diplomatic options open in dealing with the Israeli assault against Al-Aqsa Mosque. Mansour said in an interview with a London-based Al-Hayat newspaper, Israel, as the occupying power, is responsible under international law to maintain the status quo in the occupied city of Jerusalem. He also said Jordan backs a political solution in Syria as the only way out of the crisis. He said Syria is an exception given the Arab Spring revolt and predicted the conflict will continue in the country due to the special situation there. The cabinet discussed the evolving situation in the Palestinian territories and Al-Aqsa Mosque. The ministers said Israeli aggressions will only lead to more violence in the Middle East and the occupied Palestinian lands. They strongly condemned the attacks in the West Bank at Jerusalem's Muslims and Christian holy sites by Israel, the occupying power. The cabinet said it rejects all the illegal Israeli measures, including settlement building and attempts to change the status quo in Jerusalem. It urged world nations and international organizations to stand up against the Israeli escalation that had ignited the violence across the Palestinian lands. Also, during today's session chaired by Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour, the cabinet discussed measures taken by the Ministry of Water and Irrigation to enforce the law and stop assaults on water resources. Authorities have discovered the third biggest water theft in Al-Kastal area near the airport highway south of Amman, where a tunnel had been dug under the road to illegally divert the main water feeding the area. Mansour told the ministers the government will impose the state's authority and decisively enforce the law to prevent such breaches, stressing no one is above the law. Water Minister Hazem al-Nasser briefed the ministers on the campaigning behind launched in cooperation with security agencies to stop violations of the water networks. Fighters said to be from the Syrian rebel Nasser army opened up a ground ceasefire against government troops in Hama. The fighters fired missiles and machine guns at their targets in Kafr Naboube town in a northern province. A video uploaded to social media also captured what was said to be the aftermath of airstrikes thought to have been carried out by Russian warplanes. A defense ministry official said Russian jet fighters made 41 sorties in Syria in the past 24 hours and attacked 40 Daesh targets. It said Russia's Air Force deployed workshops near Aleppo being used to make explosive devices for suicide bombers. Officials said the Syrian army was preparing an offensive in the area backed by Iranian soldiers and Russian jets. In Moscow, Russia's defense ministry said a Russian fighter jet came into close proximity with a U.S. Air Force jet over Syria on Saturday to identify it, not to scare it. The ministry said its jet was within 2 to 3 kilometers from the U.S. plane over Aleppo province. Washington said earlier U.S. and Russian jets came within visual identification range over Syria, where the two countries are carrying out rival bombing campaigns. Turkey said its security forces killed 10 Kurdish militants during ground and air operation in southeastern Turkey. The offensive came days after the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party called a unilateral ceasefire and ordered its forces to halt all actions in Turkey. The ceasefire was called after a bomb blast that killed 97 people at a peace rally in Ankara. The government dismissed the truce as a ploy. Turkish Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu said some of the suspects in the suicide bombing had spent months in Syria and that they could be linked to Daesh or to Kurdish militants. Davutoglu said in an interview that an investigation was underway into whether there had been intelligence and security failures in the run-up to the bombing. He said Turkey had intelligence that PKK militants and Leftist Revolutionary People Liberation Army Front had been trained as suicide bombers in northern Iraq and sent to Turkey.
And continuous operations against Daesh is even in these days continuing. Against PKK, we will continue these operations because we have intelligence report that PKK sent and some DHKPC militants were trained in northern Iraq as suicide bombers. They were sent to Turkey. So we have both of these threats. At the same time, some suspects, they were in Syria for many months.
U.S. Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton secured unexpected support from chief rival Bernie Sanders over an email scandal during their first debate, helping to defuse an issue that has dogged her campaign. Sanders, a U.S. senator from Vermont, came to her rescue as Clinton said she wanted to focus on more pressing policy issues when questioned about a private email server she used as U.S. Secretary of State. Clinton and Sanders clashed over their views about Wall Street, capitalism, gun control, and U.S. policy on Syria in the first debate between candidates who have largely steered clear of criticizing each other or the campaign trail. Commenting on the Russian intervention in Syria, Clinton said she completely opposed the move, adding that such act from Russia will worsen the situation there.
And it's important, too, that the United States make it very clear to Putin that it's not acceptable for him to be in Syria, creating more chaos, bombing people on behalf of Assad.
Both Russia's aviation authority and pro-Russian rebels in eastern Ukraine rejected a report by the Netherlands Safety Board into the causes of the downing of Malaysia airline flight MH17 in July last year. The Dutch Safety Board concluded in its final report on the crash that the plane was shot down over eastern Ukraine by a Russian-made Buck missile. But the report did not point a finger at any group or party for launching the missile. At a news conference in Moscow, the deputy head of Russia's aviation authority said Russia found the Dutch report fundamentally wrong. Russia's foreign ministry had earlier said the Dutch report had been an attempt to carry out political orders. We begin with the FIFA presidential election. His Royal Highness Prince Ali bin Al Hussein warned that delaying the February 26 elections would further harm the credibility of the soccer governing body. Prince Ali's chances of winning the vote improved last week when rival candidate Michel Platini, the UEFA president, was suspended for 90 days by FIFA's Ethics Committee, along with current FIFA boss Sepp Blatter, pending a full investigation. In the latest chapter of a corruption crisis, both have denied wrongdoing and announced that they will appeal. To Latin American football action, Alexis Sanchez and Eduardo Vargas scored 2 goals each as Chile beat Peru 4-3 for their second successive victory in the South American 2018 World Cup qualifiers. The victory puts the Copa America winners, who beat Brazil 2-0 last week, level on 6 points with Uruguay and Ecuador at the top of the 10-nation group standings. Chile coach Jorge Sampaoli saw the sent-off as a defining moment of the match, which his men successfully took advantage of. And the weather outlook: mild across the hilly areas in the rest of the kingdom for tonight, with clear skies and light northwesterly winds. Tomorrow it will be fair in the hilly areas, but relatively hot in the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea, with some clouds appearing at various altitudes and northwesterly moderate winds. The Gulf of Aqaba should also expect a somewhat hot day tomorrow, with northerly moderate winds picking up at times and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to end the news, here's a recap of our top stories. Jordan, along the Arab and Muslim world, celebrate the new Hijra year with a major religious ceremony organized by the Ministry of Awqaf and Islamic Affairs. Israel begins setting up roadblocks in Palestinian neighborhoods in Arab East Jerusalem and deploying soldiers elsewhere amid escalating tensions across the occupied territories. The Syrian army is preparing an offensive against insurgents in northern Syria, aided by Iranian troops and Russian jets. And with this, we come to an end. I'm Farah Ajlouni. Thank you for watching and have a good night.